If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you'll be familiar with Dr Colin Morrison. He's the gentleman who wants to break down the barrier between childhood and sexuality, which I find quite a concerning viewpoint. The Scottish Government doesn't. The Scottish Government have appointed Dr Colin Morrison to sit on the Scottish Education Council, a high-level government consultation body. And also they put him in charge of the project producing sex education materials for use in Scottish schools. I wrote to the Scottish Government some time ago expressing concern about Dr Morrison's opinions, and they replied saying it wasn't a concern because he was appointed by a committee, which obviously answers all the concerns, doesn't it? That really puts your mind at rest. The fact that there's a child sexuality advocate at the heart of Scottish education policy, but as long as he was appointed by a committee, that's fine. Well, I've been having a look at Dr Morrison's PhD dissertation, which is where we've got the evidence for his concerning views, and I thought you might be interested to hear some more of his opinions. Right, let's listen to this. So he writes, as an example, the need to separate childhood and sexuality has been played out in debates about the sexualization of childhood by the media, with concerns about the marketing of certain products to children which reflect sexual images or messages. The Scottish Parliament explored these issues through the commissioning of research about the prevalence of products such as toys and clothing which appear to be aimed at children under the age of 16 and which employ age-inappropriate sexual imagery or have other sexual connotations through, for example, association with certain adult brands. I'm pretty certain he'd be talking about Playboy at that point. Remember, there's a controversy, it is about this time, when Playboy started producing like pencil cases and things. So you get kids turning up at school with their Playboy branded pencil case. Anyway, elements of product design or in the way products are marketed. The primary thing would be referred to there would be clothes, particularly clothes for very young girls. And Dr Morrison says, however, while the report acknowledges concerns that children are exposed to images and goods which the adult perceives of as sexual, and that children construct and develop their identities in part through what they consume, it would be simplistic to conclude that children are in any sense simply the dupes of marketers. So he's saying, right, we need to break down the artificial barrier between childhood and sexuality. Some adults complain that it's not right that sexualized products, for example clothing, are sold to children or for children. But Dr Morrison seems to be saying, well, not so fast. The reason children want these things is because they are in fact sexual. It's the fact they do actually want them. That's natural. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not just that some clever marketers persuade little girls to dress up in these sort of highly sexual outfits. It's that that's sort of part of being a child. That's what little girls want. Because children are sexual. That's why they want sexual clothes, for example. And so there seems to be, Dr Morrison seems to be saying, this is another example of this artificial barrier that's been erected by our culture between childhood and sexuality, and he wants to break it down. What do you think of that viewpoint? Well, to say the least, I think he is entirely wrong. Even the Scottish Parliament recognises that having, for example, little girls in sort of highly sexualised outfits isn't actually good for them. It's not good for wider society. It's not good for adults to see young children in that context as well. Anyway, let's move on. Let's see what else he had to say. This idea of children as separate, in other words, separate from sexuality, creates challenges, particularly if human capability theory influences the way in which we construct learning opportunities. Right, human capability theory. What's that? Well, to be honest, it sounds like a lot of waffle to me, but I'll just give you a flavour of what it's about. This is from a definition. It says that well-being should be understood in terms of people's capabilities and functionings. Capabilities are the doings and beings that people can achieve if they so choose. Sorry, I didn't write that. That's just appalling English. But anyway, so capability theory seems to be applying. If someone's able to do something, then it's good for them to do it. It's okay for them to do it. It's good for them to do it. So well-being involves doing what you're capable of doing. Now let's remember the context. Dr. Morrison is bringing this into the discussion about the artificial barrier between childhood and sexuality. So it's saying we shouldn't have an artificial barrier between childhood and sexuality. Everyone, including children, should be able to do what they are capable of doing. Okay? As opposed to saying some things are for adults, some things are for children. Right, let's carry on with what he wrote. Human capability approaches and indeed notions of sexual rights encourage us to see learning about entitlements to sexual satisfaction as appropriate elements of the curriculum for all learners. In other words, all ages of learners, particularly where learning can be viewed as enhancing outcomes for children and young people in later life. So it's saying all children need to learn about their entitlement to sexual satisfaction because well-being involves doing the things that you are capable of doing. Okay? Now, as far as I'm concerned, the implication of that seems pretty clear to me. That his idea is that children should be able to engage in sexual activity as they are able, regardless of their age. In fact, they need to be taught that they've got an entitlement to do that. Now, at the end he throws there, particularly where learning can be viewed as enhancing outcomes for children and young people in later life. That sounds a bit like he's thinking to himself, oh, right, people might think I'm saying what I am actually saying, so I'll put this in to make it sound a bit more innocuous, particularly where learning can be viewed as enhancing outcomes for children and young people in later life. But that's a pretty half-hearted qualification, isn't it? Particularly, he's not saying only when this learning is about later life. It's just saying particularly, not only particularly. So part of the reason you teach children of all ages about their entitlement to satisfaction, part of the reason for doing that is it might help them in later life. So, is that concerning? I regard his views there, again, as extremely concerning. Again, from his dissertation, he says, in this study, the definition of sexual health provided by the World Health Organization will be used. And he says, the World Health Organization says, sexual health requires the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences. So if a person doesn't have the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, then they're not enjoying sexual health. For sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. Note all persons, not adults, not any age restriction, sexual rights of all persons. So, sexual health requires the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences. Right, what do they call the lessons on this topic in Scottish schools? RSHP. The SH stands for sexual health. They're sexual health lessons. So from nursery upwards, children receive sexual health lessons, and Dr. Morrison, along with the WHO, defines sexual health as requiring the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences. Do you find that concerning? I find that very concerning. Now, one more thing to look at here. Dr. Morrison writes about some studies that have been done of young people in Scotland, for example, age 13 and 14, being asked about their first sexual experience. And they were asked, did you regret it? Was it willing? Was it consensual? Was it an autonomous choice? Did you use contraception? And these factors Dr. Morrison describes as sexual competence. And the research that he quotes shows that, for example, girls who have sex when they're 13 tend to be less sexually competent at that age. And the way he sees that is he wants to make them more sexually competent at that age. So, and you see that reflected in these sex education resources that have been produced under his guidance, that they want to make children, I would say, it appears at any age, but in this case, you're talking about, for example, 13, to be more sexually competent. So there's not a hint that he actually thinks a girl at 13 shouldn't be having sex. That's not the issue at all. The issue is to educate them so they can be more sexually competent in order to make that decision better. So what he wants is that when a girl chooses to have sex at 13, which he seems like he's perfectly happy with, as long as she's made that decision on the basis of her sexual competence, as he defines it. Again, I think he's just completely wrong. So with Colin Morrison, I've said before, I've said again and again and again, that in his dissertation he expresses the need to break down the artificial barrier that exists between childhood and sexuality in our society. The more I look into what he's written, the more clear it becomes that he believes that children are sexual. And my understanding of what he's saying in the passages I've quoted today is that he's saying everyone has the right to sexual activity or sexual relationship regardless of age. That's my genuine understanding, face value understanding of what he was writing. That's what it implies, as I see it, very, very clearly. That also fits in with what he said, I've talked about this in another video, of him appearing to say as well that he thinks age of consent laws should be scrapped because they're part of this artificial barrier between childhood and sexuality. So now this is, I will say absolutely again, absolute certainty, Dr. Colin Morrison is a child sexuality advocate at the heart of the Scottish education system, put there by the SNP. Now I'm going to change gear and talk about something else now. I'm going to link them together at the end, but so just bear with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jordan Linden, who is a disgraced SNP former leader of North Lanarkshire Council. He was elected just last year, but then he had to stand down very quickly following allegations about sexual assault, inappropriate sexual advances to young people, to boys, etc. Now, I first came across Jordan Linden very soon after he was elected because this picture was in a local paper with some children at a local school all holding a gay pride flag. Here's a picture of him at a gay pride event. But allegations were made about him behaving inappropriately, let's say, in relation to his dealings with the Scottish Youth Parliament. So some of the other people, the young people involved in the Scottish Youth Parliament, complained about his behaviour towards them. I'll read you a little bit about the issue. Right, despite the claims involving sexual harassment of children, a private law firm was contracted to investigate rather than the police. So the Scottish Youth Parliament just made the most colossal blunder. Surely everyone knows in this day and age that if there's an allegation of sexual harassment or sexual abuse, then where does it go? It's involving young people. Where does it go? You don't start investigating yourself with your own lawyers. It goes to the police or it goes to social work. I mean, that's one of the most basic principles of child protection. I was a child protection officer years ago, and I just knew, my number one job is to pass this to someone else. You don't try and deal with these things internally. Anyway, the Scottish Youth Parliament later dismissed the allegations as false and said that Jordan Linden had no case to answer, while Linden described those who had made the claims as liars. So the claims, for example, a 14-year-old boy claimed that Jordan Linden had sent him semi-nude photographs on his phone. There were allegations of behaviour that was described as sexual assault. One of the people who reported the behaviour said, "I was criticised for my response to abuse by someone who was essentially grooming me. He was trying to start a sexual or intimate relationship while he was in a position of power and I was a child." The man, now 24, said the assault took place at a Premier Inn in Edinburgh in early September 2015 while members of the Youth Parliament were hosting a visit from a United Nations ambassador. So Jordan Linden's now admitted some of these allegations. He's resigned. As a result of him resigning, the SNP lost control of the council in North Lanarkshire. After this happened, I mean, this is quite remarkable. A former MP, a former SNP MP, Phil Boswell, said this: "Believe me, there is much, much more to come. A nest of clowns, chancers, liars, thieves, and the occasional viper that you would never want to see." Jordan Linden was selected as leader certainly because of his loyalty to the ideologically obsessed Gender Recognition Act, Self-ID Parade, and his undying loyalty to Nicola. He should never have been put in place in leader of the council. There are DICK pics floated around social media, and the garbage I've heard him utter would have you broke. Sadly, there is many more where he came from within North Lanarkshire SNP. Right, that sounds to me like the gravest allegations or reporting of what actually is going on inside the SNP in that area, at least. I mean, does it surprise us? I mean, another story of a scandal like this from the SNP, is it news? Not really. Not really. I mean, there's so many. This is just one of a whole string of them. Why am I telling this story? I'm telling this story because when I first heard it, I thought, right, Scottish Youth Parliament. Hang on a minute. Dr Colin Morrison is involved with the Scottish Youth Parliament. I wonder if he is involved in this management board that got it so disastrously wrong in dealing with sexual abuse of young people, very young people in some cases. So I thought that would be quite a connection, wouldn't it? So I looked into it, and actually I was mixed up. Dr Colin Morrison is involved with the Scottish Children's Parliament, not the Scottish Youth Parliament. So I thought that connection wasn't there. But actually, does that make the situation any better? So just to ensure that you don't get confused, the Scottish Youth Parliament is where an SNP, a man who became the leader of an SNP council, that's where he was grooming and making sexual advances to boys, and he had to resign over it. That's the Scottish Youth Parliament, not to be confused with the Scottish Children's Parliament. That's the one where one of the people running it is an advocate of child sexuality. So wherever you look, it's the same picture. Okay, it's a sorry state, isn't it? And this needs challenging. It needs challenging at every level, and it needs challenging by people who've got the clear moral vision to not just challenge what's wrong, but to bring something more positive in its place as well. And in Scotland, that is the Scottish Family Party. So support us in our mission. Do join the Scottish Family Party right now. There's a link below. Thanks for watching.